first of all, what do we know about the scope of the problem? I mean, there were as many as 1,800 kids, I guess, separated originally. How many do we know have been returned already, and how many still are separated from their parents? Do we know?
We know about 700 parents are not currently reunited with their children. About half of that, about 350 of them or so, the administration is saying is not eligible. However, the criteria by which they're determining that eligibility, I think, is a little bit vague. The other 460 roughly have been actually deported to Central America. I think that's the population where, unfortunately, it's probably going to be a very long time before they're actually reunited with their children.
So is there a solution to the problem? Because I've seen some senators asking in the hearings today, what is the solution? What can we do about this?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, the best solution was offered by Ted Cruz and elements of it. And that is we need to beef up the immigration courts. I don't think what people understand is that prior to a deportation, when you filed an asylum claim, you get to see an immigration judge who's going to determine if that claim is valid. The problem is we've never adequately funded our immigration courts. And today you have 300 judges handling about 800,000 cases. So you have these massive backlogs. That's the real issue here. We can still be tough at the border, release these parents, make sure they show up for court, but just move their cases along quickly, and I think the problem is solved in a much more humane way.
Some agents have even proposed recently creating a standalone investigations unit, another agency to just handle those deportations and so forth. Even if abolish ICE, that movement is too dramatic. Do you believe that there is room for reorganization here at the agency?
I think what we need to reorganize is the manner in which the immigration enforcement system works. I think there are some one of the issues with ICE is that half of the agency is dedicated to conduct, national security and public safety criminal investigations, going after drug cartels, going after money laundering, going after export of weapons or technology to countries like North Korea and Iran. There is some argument there, and I think it's an issue that should be examined, whether or not it makes sense to separate the agency from the immigration enforcement side of things. But look, the frustration the abolish ICE people have with ICE is related to the administration's policies and just the fact that we have this broken immigration enforcement system. And whether you move those functions over to DOJ or some new agency, it's not going to satisfy the frustrations that these people have with the manner in which immigration enforcement is being conducted, especially by this administration.
I think that's exactly the point, because despite halting this zero tolerance policy, there's really no solution to what's going to happen to these people, especially their children that cannot be detained for a longer period of time. So are we just back to square one?
Yeah, I mean, the frustration thing for me is that there really are simple answers to this. If we could put the politics aside, I think if you put me in the room with some of the biggest immigration enforcement hawks who come from the agency, we could craft out a very sensible policy to deal with this problem, where people get an opportunity to present their asylum claims, and if they fail, they're removed very quickly, but in a way that keeps families together and it's humane. Unfortunately, the politics in immigration just makes everything a zero-sum game, and really, I think the American public loses, and in many ways, ICE and DHS lose as well.
So, John, let's assume for the moment, and it's a big assumption, we put the politics to one side, and we decided we're going to have a lot more hearing officers who can hear these claims and adjudicate them promptly. How difficult would that be? How long does it take to train one of these people? Are there people available who could perform that function?
I think if pressed, the administration could figure out a way to just train in, some lawyers who could serve as asylum-only officers. But look, realistically, you're probably looking at a year lag time. I don't think it's the end of the world, though. In the interim, what you could do is, as a stopgap measure, is dedicate some of the current judges just to focus on these cases. But look, in terms of releasing the families, too, the technology is proven. We ran pilots when I was at ICE, and they've continued to run pilots, and they demonstrate that in 96 to 99% of the cases, people show up for court. There are ways in the emergency situation to deal with this, but we're probably, realistically, for a steady state, you're looking at a year.
John, because you did work at ICE and you have this experience, I ask you, is there a risk here actually that ironically and perversely we will be distracting ourselves from some of the things that we really do need ICE to be doing, really protecting our borders and keeping people out, because we're so fixated on this tragic problem, the separation of children from their parents?
Very much so. Listen, the backlash you're seeing with the abolish ICE movement is, in many ways, a direct result of the family separation issue. And the funny thing about it is ICE only plays a marginal role in that. They detain the parents, but the separation is done by the U.S. Border Patrol, and the kids go into custody of Health and Human Services. But you're exactly right. The problem is this backlash impacts ICE's ability to do its job. ICE needs to rely on informants in immigrant communities to tell them who the MS-13 guys are, who are the gang members. They need to cooperate very closely with big city law enforcement like the New York Police Department, LAPD. But when you engage in these policies and you have this political backlash, the police departments, frankly, they're pretty overt about it. They say, we just can't cooperate with you anymore because that's being viewed as cooperating with ICE, which is bad politics. And that definitely hurts ICE's ability to do its job, which, going to the question of reorganization, frankly, is why the criminal investigators at ICE have been pretty vocal in writing a letter to the secretary saying, please separate us from the immigration side because these politics are hindering our ability to execute critical national security and public safety work.
And of course, just making it difficult for ICE is also just a sheer flow of migrants that has spiked since 2014. How soon can we expect this trend to change? What is usually the amount of time when we see this influx and then this fading out of these migrant flows?
Typically the smuggling season in the United States is in the spring, the late spring and early summers where you see the highest flows. With the Central American population, however, it's been elevated over the last 4 years throughout the year, although you do see those seasonal fluctuations. Look, one thing we're talking about what to do about this. The thing I haven't mentioned is a lot of the work to stop this is done in Central America. You look at the murder rates of those three countries. There are three, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. They're three of the highest murder rates in the world. So when you have that level of violence and that level of dysfunction in those countries, you create this push effect. And there's very little. I think we often look at what the United States can do to stop people from coming. The reality is there's very little because conditions are so horrific down there. Remember, these people are paying everything they have, $5,000 to $8,000 to smugglers, getting extorted, assaulted along the way, just to have a chance to get to the United States. I don't think detention, and I hate to say it, I'm not even sure family separation is a significant enough deterrent. We got to look abroad as well. Take a holistic approach, State Department aid, law enforcement assistance in Central America, and work with Mexico to do a better job along their southern border.